The 1952 Washington flyover. The famous Washington, D.C. UFO flyover occurred over 3 successive weekends on July 12th and 13th, followed by more sightings on July 19th and 20th, and finally on July 26th and 27th. These flights were not just above Washington, D.C. airspace, but above other East Coast cities and rural areas. The sighted UFOs flew in formation and created a major international buzz, just as predicted a few months earlier by Van Tassel's contacts. However, a question emerges of how many of the flying saucer craft were part of the group communicating with George Van Tassel and came from the space base Share, and how many were part of a negative group of alien visitors that the Ashtar Command had given warnings about.
Welcome to Lights in the Night with your host, Russell Johnson. Uncover the truth about alien contact and hear from insiders who reveal the evidence. Stay tuned.
And once again, we will address very softly the issues that are coming to the fore, meaning that there is another congressional hearing on this subject matter in another couple of weeks, and that's going to be more information besides the soft one. They passed on some information for us a couple of months ago, if you will. So it's going to continue to come out piece by piece until you really get the sense that they are really here. Not only are they here, but when you go back in history and look at the Anunnaki, that they came to this planet 400,000 years ago, and that they put us together, and that since then, other species in the universe have put their DNA into us. And so, according to Michael Seller, and as I look at this book talking about the Galactic Federation of Councils, so when you want to see what's going on, he is really a proponent of a lot of research, a very prolific, consummate researcher, and he talks about all of this stuff. But I don't want to get that heavy. I just want to keep it real soft and easy today. The stuff he talks about in this book is kind of frightening for most people, but so we're going to keep it simple. But the aliens are here. They did create us some thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands of years ago, maybe millions of years ago. And they're watching over us. They're seeing what we want to do, what we can do. So I have with us Norman once again, and he has graciously consented to be with us again to talk about the issues. Now, Norman has been around a long time in terms of the study of this, 40, 50 years, deep entrenched in the study of the UFOs and what's going on planet Earth. So Norman, thank you very much for being with us. When did you start looking at this whole issue of UFOs, aliens, flying saucers, and all the like? When did you start?
Russ, great to be with you again. For me, this goes back to 1989, specifically the fall of 1989 is when I really went from, I would say, a curious person, like a lot of us are, who love science fiction movies and books and television, Star Trek and Star Wars, to a more serious researcher looking into this and really trying to understand at a deeper level what was going on.
Wow, that's good. George Green, you met him. See, he was in the Air Force in the 60s. I was in, believe it or not, I joined the Air Force of May of 1952. So that tells you who I am. But my duties when I was there, I was a control tower operator. I was a controller, air traffic controller. So I saw a lot of stuff back in the 51, 52, 53, because I went to even Luke Air Force Base in Arizona, which has 50,000 landings and takeoffs a month. So it's a kind of busy airport. So we saw a lot of things, but we couldn't talk about that. Why don't we go back and say, and talk about the psychology, the philosophy, or the meme, if you will, of the people in charge having the people who have seen something or talk or involved in the process not to talk about it. Let's talk about that. Men in Black and all of that.
Russ, you mentioned 1952, and that's an important year because just 2 years later, which is this year, 2024, the 70th anniversary, 2 years later was 1954, is when Eisenhower got together with a group of his top military people and also political people and cabinet members and whatnot, and created Executive Order NSC 540111, which was an executive memorandum, is what it was called at that time, to create something called Majority 12 to oversee and conduct all covert activities concerned with the alien question. And it was at this time in the early 50s that we had really what we think of today as sort of a UFO panic. You know, it was just a few years after Roswell in the late 1940s. In the 1950s was really this explosion of like UFO movies and alien movies, and It Came from Outer Space and The Day the Earth Stood Still and Invaders from Mars and all this stuff. And it was really captured the imagination of the entire country in the late 40s and early 50s, and it became a dominant part of our culture. And so that was a reflection of what was going on behind the scenes in the government. And since the 1940s, when they began to observe aliens or UFO activity related to nuclear weapons development, really became a big deal for them. And so I think for the federal government, it was really trying to understand why were extraterrestrial spacecraft so interested in the nuclear weapons program and nuclear energy and what they called atomic testing back then, prior to the use of nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan at the end of World War II. And the establishment of everything, the Men in Black, these committees, the study groups, and all the sort of clandestine activity that was going on at that time was really a reaction to trying to figure out why the extraterrestrials were so fixated on these atomic testing and nuclear programs.
I see. So Majestic 12 was there, and the CIA with Alan Dulles, he was involved in the whole process, and he knew a lot of information. As a matter of fact, according to Michael Seller, he says that he gave the final order to have Kennedy killed, JFK, because JFK wanted more information on the alien activity. And as president, just elected, he's saying that he was determined to get that the kind of information from the CIA and from Majestic 12 and all those people above top secret. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happened and as a result of he trying to get that information that they didn't want him to have?
Yes, and as this so-called UFO threat emerges in our government and really the governments of the world, this wasn't just the United States, this was activity that was observed in China and Russia and really all over the world. It split the world into two factions behind the scenes. There was a disclosure faction and there was a secrecy faction. And so one faction wanted to get the word out, wanted to get more exposure for this, at least have a conversation, maybe not to release every possible thing that they could put out there and compromise their security, but at least get a conversation going. And then there was another faction that wanted to just completely suppress it and turn this deep, deep secret black projects. And we know now which faction won that battle, at least during the 40s and 50s. And that's really what ultimately led to the to the issue with Kennedy. And a lot of people have speculated over the years that it was due to the fact that he was going after the CIA, or he was going after the mob, or he was going to go after the Federal Reserve. And I think some of these things were all true, but I think ultimately his demise and the assassination of JFK was directly related to his participation in being in the wrong faction at the wrong time with the wrong people, which led to his death.
Okay. So how about James Forrester? He was pushed out of the window. Let's talk about who he was and what happened to him. And he was part of MJ-12. He was one of the original members of the MJ-12, but he wanted to be on the side of those people who wanted disclosure to tell the public, tell around the world that aliens were here and that we had commandeered some of the aircraft and we were back engineering those aircraft. Um, but just to get people to let's talk about him for a minute. James Forrestal, who was Secretary of State.
James Forrestal's story is tragic, bizarre, and really unfortunate because you're exactly right. He found himself on the wrong side of the fence. It ultimately was committed to a mental institution and then supposedly fell out of a window and died. And this was a person who was an important part of the executive branch, and was, like you said, Secretary of Defense. And it's pretty sad, but some of these people who have worked hard to try to do what they believe to be the right thing at the time have had untimely deaths under unusual circumstances. And this is a pattern that we see throughout this entire episode over the last almost 100 years. Anyone that comes forward that has something to say that is a benefit to the Front Porch America sometimes gets involved in scandals and their careers are ruined, or they die, or they disappear, or something happens to them, and everyone's probably tired of hearing this because it just sounds like such a tinfoil sob story. But this is really happening and has happened for a very long time.
Yep. So right along those lines, now being in the Air Force, I was in 1952. I joined May of '52, so it's a couple of years ago. Certainly, if I saw anything as a controller, I couldn't say anything because I would have been dismissed to be kind. But George Green came along in the '60s. George Green, you worked with on many occasions, and he has a website, by the way, is nohoax, HOAX.net. So if you want to go to his website, he's gone now. But let's talk about the things. He did see some things in the '60s, but later on he came out and decided to discuss what he had seen. What happened to him? Let's talk about that. You and he worked together.
Yeah, I ran into George in 1989. At that time, he had established a company called America West, based out of Carlsbad, California, for the purpose of publishing books transmitted to one Doris Ecker by the Pleiadians and the Galactic Federation of Light, including Commander Hatton, Commander Ashtar, and the rest. And so I think they picked George because he had business experience. He had been involved in a lot of entrepreneurial projects. He understood what was going on in his work at Edwards Air Force Base in the '60s, where he undoubtedly saw lots of things there and perhaps had access to a variety of secret programs, put him in a position where they didn't have to do a lot of convincing with him to get him to understand what was going on. Like anyone who's in those spaces may not have spoken about it, but knew what was going on. And so they selected him to create the publishing company to produce the books that they did produce in the late '80s and '90s, many volumes. And so he was instrumental in that and helped them with that to get those books published.
Did you ever pick up the Robinson Report? They put that out around 1953. That the powers that be came together to discuss this whole issue. That if we did discover that aliens were among us, that we were being visited, that it came out with a conclusion. Did you ever see the Robinson Report? Hello?
Not specifically the Robinson Report, but in the Pleiadian documentation that George Green published through the scribe that was working with the Pleiadians, they did speak at length about something called the Jason Society Alternatives. And the alternatives were put together as a set of alternatives 1, 2, and 3. The Jason Society was a group of scholars who had been organized prior to this, but were tapped sort of like a think tank or a foundation to come up with alternatives for Eisenhower and for this secret executive order. There were 3 alternatives, alternative 1, 2, and 3. One, I'll be very brief, and I think Sala speaks about this, Alternative one was to essentially disclose this information and get it out there and see what would happen with that. Alternative two was to build a vast network of underground cities and tunnels so that they could sort of dig in and disappear. And alternative three was to basically leave, to go to other planets, to recolonize the moon or Mars and leave. And they decided to do 2 and 3. So that's pretty obvious. So they wanted to have two plans: go underground or go out into space, and create. Either one was a breakaway society.
Okay, so we got a breakaway civilization. So as we speak here today, here is it, but I forget the date of the day, September 13th, 14th, whatever it is. The breakaway civilization is still in existence, and when we talk about people who know of its existence, like Linda Moulton Howe, like George Green did before he left, like Michael Seller, like we talk about Dr. Greer. You know Dr. Greer very well, and he's been working on this for 35 years. Where are we today in this whole disclosure process, and then the congressional hearings coming up in another couple of weeks? Where are we today? Who's winning? Who's losing?
Not only do we have congressional hearings coming up, and the people that are sponsoring this and pushing this forward, like Senators Kristen Gillibrand, are claiming that they really want to go further. She said, we also want to continue to build credibility with this office so more of the public can feed in sightings, and they want to gather more information. She said, it's a priority for me to do this. I think it's very important that we continue to make things publicly available. We also have things like former National Security Advisor and retired Army Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster is coming forward with a lot of disclosure. We have another UFO boss from Luis Elizondo's office, Jay Stratton, who is the former director of the U.S. government's secretive UAP task force, has just inked a deal to write a book with HarperCollins about this stuff. So there's a lot of activity. The big $64,000 question is this real or is this make-believe? In other words, is this real disclosure or is this fake disclosure that's being put out by the ultimately the security state to try to control the narrative?
Okay, all right. Listen, I think we're coming to the end of the show. But Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Let's take a break here, and we'll be right back in a moment. Sorry about that.
Introducing Pure Light, the revolutionary air purification system integrated into a special LED light bulb. Pure Light eliminates pet odors, human odors, and even mold and smoke odors with just the flip of a light switch. Guaranteed for 5 years with a 100% money-back guarantee. Transform your home or office today. Visit pure-light.com and use code RUSS, R-U-S-S, for an exclusive 20% discount. Breathe cleaner, live happier with Pure Light. pure-light.com. Promo code RUSS, R-U-S-S.
You're watching Lights in the Night with Russell Johnson. The truth is only one discussion away.
Speaking of lights in the night, and Freddie, do you have any? You talk about that back engineering of the spacecraft, and that light system came out of that. Is that right? Did you want to talk about that for a minute? Oh, all right. Dawn.
A5.
Dawn.
Yes, you're talking about the light system that we saw on the commercial.
Right.
That light system.
Norman, I don't think Norman heard about this yet.
That light bulb that was used in the orbiters up in space.
Space station.
So I tested this thing out personally in my house in one of the rooms that has mold or smell of mold, and we left it on. Not even 15 minutes. Now we leave it on, and it doesn't smell at all. So there's a town in Texas, that lady that we know that writes the checks for the town in Texas, and they're looking into changing this town over to this light bulb as well. They're doing their own due diligence. But it's an amazing, amazing product.
Wow.
The technology, where it came from, I'll leave that up to you.
Well, Norman knows. Norman, they've back engineered a lot of things, and I really appreciate you being on because of the degree of research and prolific understanding of all of this. You've been doing it for like 40 years or better. Uh, what are some of the other things besides 0 point energy and this light bulb? What else have they come up with in terms of back engineering those spacecraft?
Initially, the bulk of their interest, and when I say there, the federal government and the international community was anti-gravitic technology to try to understand how these craft were able to travel in and out of our atmosphere without visible means of propulsion. And this is one of the classic aspects of a UAP is they don't, they have non-ballistic movement. They're able to move in ways that we don't understand, stop on a dime, accelerate to incredible speeds, and so on and so forth. So for weapons development and for their own craft, they were mostly interested in propulsion. But I think a lot of other technologies came out of the spacecraft that were crashed or damaged or that they were able to capture that are more mundane technologies. And I talked about this briefly before, the rise of Silicon Valley, all of the companies like Intel and Microsoft and everything that came out of that, Apple and all these other companies came out of the initial research that was done in Palo Alto in the early 50s at the exact same time that this executive order was created. And I think that as they created an order to control the technology for the use of military purposes, they also wanted to commercialize it. And that's been the struggle all along, which is how to move this technology back into the mainstream and monetize it. And it's a lot of different stuff. And it could be something very mundane that we think of as just basic technology like Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or something. But these things are a lot of these things are coming from alien technology.
That's awesome. Have you seen The Lost Century by Dr. Stephen Greer? It's about an hour, 15 minutes, where he talks about all the things that have come out of the back engineering of those spacecraft and how they would eliminate the need for fossil fuel and all of that, and the need for that they would have the resources to feed every man, woman, and child information, medical care on planet Earth without them raising any money for it because of the science involved. Have you heard about all of that? Even the med bed they talk about.
Yes, and I
Go ahead. Sorry.
I've seen many clips from that and paid attention to Stephen Greer's work. He just launched a new website just I think in the last week or so with like tens of thousands of pages of information disclosure that he's got on his website, and these technologies, unfortunately for us, are disruptive technologies, and they disrupt the status quo. They go against the current ways that we do things. So as much as the people in the know have wanted to push this stuff back into the mainstream and make money with it, it would really disrupt our economy in a lot of different ways. And what they've been trying to figure out for decades is how to bring it back in without destroying a lot of other technologies that are out there that aren't really efficient and aren't really good for us.
They also talk about on the medical side of the things that we take pills, potions, and lotions, all that stuff. And they said once we get the med bed, galactic chamber, and the psionics and all of that, there'd be no need for the traditional medicines. Have you been apprised of any of that?
The movie that I always suggest for people to watch is called Elysium with Matt Damon and Jodie Foster, a sci-fi movie that came out several years ago. It is the most blatant kind of disclosure that you can imagine, where they've set up an orbiting space station for the rich people, and they all have med beds and they all have technology that can heal people instantly. This is more soft disclosure that's coming out. Elysium, if you haven't seen it, watch it. We don't really understand all the technologies that are waiting in the wings, but we know that they're fundamentally different than the way we do things now. And I talk about Edison versus Tesla, Nikola Tesla, not Elon Musk. Tesla technology from Nikola Tesla is so fundamentally different than the way that we do things, even though we use his technology every day through alternating current and radio and other things. That it's really just not compatible with our system. Our entire system is based on what I call Edison technology. It's more to it than that, but the technology we need to move to, unfortunately, is incompatible with our current system. And it's until we get to the point where we can understand how to make the transition from the old sort of Edison tech to Tesla tech, that's the hardest part, is how to get to make the leap from one tech to another.
So it's all about the money. So we have to follow the dollar. And I think that's what Stephen Greer, Billy Carson, you, and other people who are really delved in and steeped into the research on all of this, saying that there are, Greer said it this way. He said there are trillions and trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars that have been taken from the coffers, if you will, of the Treasury of the United States back to the real dark Space Force, so they spend the money as they see the need to, without any accountability to the Congress or the President or the senators of the United States. Are you aware of all of that? I'm sure you are, but could you give us a thumbnail sketch on what's going on that level of all that money that they're taking away from us without any disclosure at all?
Sure, I'll bring up two important points. We just had the unfortunate anniversary of 9/11 after many years, 23 years, I guess, 24 years since that happened. And a lot of people who are conspiracy theorists, tinfoil hats, like to point out that just a few days prior to 9/11, there was an audit attempted, I will say attempted because it's really never been completed, of the DOD. And the DOD audit showed multiple trillions of dollars unaccounted for. And so this is just one snapshot of really what's been an agency that's been around for decades, and their budget now is 800 to 900 billion, very nearly $1 trillion, more spending for our DOD than all other countries combined. And where does that money go? That money, even though we have a very large and sophisticated military, it doesn't take that much money to support our armed service people and our bases, as large as they are. That money's going somewhere. It's being siphoned away.
Oh, okay. Well, but we down the rabbit hole on this one, and the time is up. But thank you. I really appreciate that clarity on that. But Dr. Greer said, as we close, that he was offered $2 billion if he would have shut up and go away. In 10 to 15 seconds, have you heard about that?
If you look at the entertainment industry, the political class, the corporate elites, the ones with the most money are the ones that took the deal.
Oh, okay. My case closed. Thank you. Listen, next time, let's do part 3, part 4. Listen, we really appreciate you giving us all the research on this, and thank you very much for being on Lights in the Night. So next time, we'll be back with more information for you on Lights in the Night with me, Russ Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Lights in the Night. Keep your eyes on the skies and stay curious. Until next time, good night.